Welcome, friends. So glad you're joining us, and I am really happy to welcome Mark Hurst to this week's program. I suppose I should put a couple of disclaimers in this. I have known Mark since he was 25 years old, when he was a hot ticket computer person fresh out of MIT, having founded a rather interesting new business that was designed to help users of the breathtaking pace change internet, designed for the user to develop practices and good ends for what this marvelous new technology promised. And we had the opportunity to become acquainted, and then we had an opportunity to stay acquainted as the years progressed. So I've known Mark all of this time, and his career has unfolded in very interesting ways, including public presentation modes that were TED-like in nature for a lot of years, and more recently, on the radio. And I guess, Mark, you're going to tell us a bit about what that is, but I want Mark now to tell you who he thinks he is. Mark, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, Steve, first of all, thanks for having me on, and Brandon, thank you. And yes, Steve, we met when I was 25, and I appreciate your mentorship and friendship over these decades now, multiple decades. Can you believe
wild? Isn't it wild? It's how it's evolved.
So yeah. It's a real privilege, as always, to speak with you, and happy to be on the podcast. As for me, I've been in the tech industry for 30 years now. As you say, I started a company that had to do with making web platforms and services easier for people to use, more focused on the user's needs.
Right.
That's a company called Creative Good, which I still run. But there was a change along the way in that in about 2016 or 2017, I had become so disillusioned with what I saw were the growing unethical practices of the big tech companies. This is Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft. Those are the main ones. While I continued to run Creative Good and write my email newsletter that I've written there for a long time, in addition, I launched a radio show and have used that to speak out against what I see as the deep injustice of the tech-dominated economy. And that's allowed me to meet a whole bunch of people and interview, at this point, over 300 people in
Wow.
over 8 years of radio. So I spend my time prepping and doing the radio show. I write the email newsletter at Creative Good. And other than that, I am doing more prep for the radio show.
By the way, at the end of this podcast, we'll make sure that there are connections to the various endeavors that you're a part of, including Creative Good and including the radio show, so people know where they can find you for more in-depth analysis.
Thanks. And I should have said the name of the radio show is Tectonic. Yeah. It's like tectonic plates, except it's a play on words. It's TECH, tonic.
Yes, indeed. So, Mark, the focus of this conversation, I think, mostly we want to focus on the emergence of AI, and I'm going to give you a pretty free hand on this to let you say what you're thinking these days, and perhaps feel free to provide a historic context for it if, as you feel the need, or any contextual analysis that might help us get on board with it. And remember that our audience probably ranges in their understanding of the nature of AI and so on. So with that in mind, I'm going to let you get us going on your thinking about these matters.
Sure. Well, first of all, we should be clear about what we mean when we say AI.
Yes.
And we should state AI stands for artificial intelligence, which is essentially a marketing term that some old-time computer scientists came up with at a Dartmouth conference many decades ago. but AI at this point today is an umbrella term that fits onto just about everything that's going on in digital technology. I mean, you can talk about generative AI, which is, using ChatGPT to output uh, an essay. That's one of the classic uses, unfortunately, that students have put it to. There's generative AI for music and videos and images as well. But you can also use AI in a completely different sphere of image recognition. So there's now AI systems that claim to help doctors spot tumors. So a radiologist might use an AI system to look at an X-ray, and there are many other uses of AI as well. Basically, what happened in the last, I don't know, 10 or so years is that we got a lot of data as the internet was bringing together and encouraging people to post lots of data in public forums. So there was data that was publicly available. There are faster processors now to crunch all the data that's available, and the cost of storage has gone way down. And so if you can store data and gather it from the internet and process it with these fancy processors called GPUs, then you can do all sorts of, I'll say interesting, as a neutral term, interesting things with that analysis. So if anybody wants to do more reading on what AI is, just a very basic one-volume treatment, this is a book that I featured on the show. I had both of the authors on. It's a book called The AI Con, C-O-N, The AI Con by Emily M. Bender and Alex Hanna. And they do a good job of dispensing with a lot of the myths and mystery around AI. And they do make a point of saying that AI is lots of things. My own relationship with the phenomenon of AI is to do the same thing, I feel like, that I've done for 30 years with all of the other online technologies that I've encountered and evaluated, which is to say, okay, but what is it good for? And who is it good for? And who benefits? And when you start looking at AI from that critical angle, a lot of interesting things pop out, which is to say the actual positive use cases of AI, in my opinion, are vastly outweighed by the measurable and significant costs, and in many cases, the harms of these systems. So, and again, I'm being a little general here because AI is lots of things, but as the conversation usually goes in the media today when they say, what about AI? They're really talking about generative AI, things like ChatGPT, these generators, less about the radiology scans, which are still out there. But when we talk about generative AI, ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and the like, I can say there are some genuine use cases. There are some limited benefits to those systems, but the cost, I don't think people understand the unbelievably immense scale of the cost of these systems, both in money and natural resources, and in some cases in human lives.
Can you give some examples of what you've just described as negative outcomes?
Well, sure. I mean, sadly, there are multiple lawsuits right now against OpenAI. This is the company that whose CEO is Sam Altman, if anyone has heard that name. OpenAI is the company that makes ChatGPT. And as I said, there are now lawsuits because teenagers have formed relationships with ChatGPT as a friend, as a girlfriend, boyfriend figure, as a therapist. And I should use the air quotes here. They form relationships because they're not real relationships when you're interacting with a chatbot. It's just ones and zeros, but it's programmed to present the illusion that it's listening to the user and dispensing, helpful, caring feedback. And without any guardrails or safety checks, really, before ChatGPT was released, it, in a number of cases, ended up encouraging vulnerable teens to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And so now there are parents who, with the help of lawyers, are going after, rightfully so, going after OpenAI for launching this dangerous technology. So that's one of the extreme cases. Now, it that's let me back up. There are other harms on users that don't involve, suicide, but the New York Times has been writing a series of articles this year about how people go into a delusional state if they use chatbots like ChatGPT a lot. And so marriages have broken up, people have lost their jobs. Some people have needed to be committed to mental facilities because they have essentially a nervous breakdown because of the deep uncanniness of relating to an illusion. So that's one bucket of costs, is the human costs. People's family members are sick or now dead because a product, according to statements from past employees at OpenAI, it was a product that was rushed to market in a bid for growth at any cost. So you have this personal cost. In a different bucket, it's related, but it's a separate basket of harms. We can talk about the environmental costs. Now,
Yes.
your listeners and viewers may not understand, as I said, the immense scope and scale of the AI build-out that's going on right now. So nationwide, let's just talk about the US. I want people to guess how much of the electricity in the US, I mean, out of all the electricity that is generated by all the power plants in all 50 states, what percentage of that is just going to data centers?
I'm going to
Right
ask Brandon to guess that.
Just because of what I know and what I've read, like, it's immense. I don't know the percentage, but I would imagine it is going to be surprising.
Anything in my book, anything over 0.000, something percent is going to be a huge.
Right, exactly.
So it's already over 4% of all U.S. electricity. And there was a Department of Energy report that came out a few months ago that had projections for where it could go by 2028. And of course, it's a range. The lower end of the range is, I think, 6.7%, and the high end of the range was 12% of all U.S. electricity. The situation is even worse in other countries, maybe smaller countries that have invested a lot in data centers, such as Ireland. About 1/4, about 25% of all electricity in Ireland goes to data centers. And then you've got data centers popping up in vulnerable communities all over the world. Now, the reason for this giant build out of both data centers and power plants to power them is because the big tech companies of Facebook, Google, Amazon, and so on, and now including OpenAI too, they need to grow. Most of these companies are already in the multiple trillions of dollars. Imagine that, multiple trillions of dollars for a company. How are they going to continue with their exponential growth forever and ever? So they're banking on these data centers somehow magically providing the revenue to continue the ascent of their stocks. There's a lot of analysis out there that says it's simply impossible for these businesses to grow much more than they already have based on this AI idea. But anyway, that's why there's such a draw on electricity. Clean water is another big draw. So some of these giant data centers can use millions of gallons of water in a relatively short time. There's nuance here. Some data centers recycle the water, others evaporate it, and so the water actually gets lost into the air. But they need the water in order to cool down those chips. The GPUs get very hot. So power and water is a big is a big issue. So we have the personal, and we now have the environmental as well. There's one more harm that I want to bring up, and then I'll stop because As I like to say, I'm
You've
a lot
always
of
been good. You've always been good at describing how we're
what's
all
going
going to
wrong.
hell in a handbasket. I
Right.
know that. No,
But
yeah.
this time it's true.
Yeah, I know.
So there's one other harm I want to talk about, and that is just the sheer cost of this. So there's a data center complex that's going up in Indiana. This is being built by Mark Zuckerberg through Facebook. Facebook, a company so bad they decided to rename it as though we would forget that it was actually Facebook. They like to call it Meta. That's why I call them Facebook. But this is the company that runs 3 platforms that no one should ever use if they have a choice: Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. I strongly urge your listeners to get off all 3 of those platforms if they can. Not everyone can, but if you can, get off of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp today. But anyway, in order to continue his ill-advised bid at eternal growth at any cost, Mark Zuckerberg is building this data center. His data center, sorry. But Mark Zuckerberg is building in Northeast Louisiana. I got the state wrong. In Northeast Louisiana, the largest data center in the Western Hemisphere. And that is so big that Mark Zuckerberg boasted about it by showing the footprint of the data center overlaid over a map of Manhattan. And it was as big as a sizable chunk of the island of Manhattan. Zuckerberg's very proud of this. So these things are not cheap, these data center complexes. The one in Indiana is an Amazon data center complex, and it's going to cost several $1 billion. So, who do you think is this is where it gets really wild? Who's going to pay the several $1 billion it's going to take? It's going to be over $8 billion to build a data center complex. Who's paying for that? Any guesses? Where do the funds come from to build the Amazon data center?
Electric bills
and tax revenue.
Yeah. So the answer that is you're both getting at, and you're right, is that the Amazon data center complex is being paid for by the residents of the area in Indiana where it's going to be built.
Promise of jobs and
exactly. So they're promised jobs. There have been multiple studies showing that data centers do not create jobs. I mean, an entire data center, they just need someone to switch out the chips when they burn out. It's like, maybe 50 jobs. In the meantime, you have this incredible draw of power and water, and there is no business activity being built. They're not giving back to the community. And by the way, did I mention that the residents have to pay $8 billion for this? So why would the citizens of an area agree to pay billions of dollars out of, tax breaks and subsidies and everything else in order to bring big tech in to draw down their electricity so that, you're right, Steve, their electricity bill would go up? Bloomberg estimates that electricity bills go up as much as 267% when a data center comes to town.
Yeah.
Why would residents agree to this? And the answer is they didn't agree to it. In fact, they didn't even know that it was coming. How did they not know? Because the local officials who did sign the agreement were under a non-disclosure agreement with Amazon. So this is the way the big tech companies operate now. They come to town, they capture the officials, they say, in order for us to do anything at all, you have to sign this agreement, this legally binding agreement of secrecy, meaning you can never tell your constituents who we are or how terrible this deal is going to be. And the officials sign because they want to get to the groundbreaking with a little shovel saying, brought jobs, and unfortunately, sometimes it works that politicians do get elected based on that PR. But the fact is that the citizens didn't have a voice in that process. So we have the personal cost, the environmental cost, and now the political and monetary cost to everyday citizens. And all of this together, we take all of those costs and those harms, and you put it on the scale. And you have to weigh that against the benefits of AI. And let me ask you, have you, in your experiments and you're playing around with ChatGPT, has it been worth to you a rise in 267% of your electricity bill, the lives of innocent teenagers, the dismantling of the democratic process in your community. Is the chatbot really that good? For me, in my calculus, I'd say, no, it's not.
Well, you know that this is exacerbated by the great gulf between what you've just described and the frothy, manufactured excitement and anticipation for all of the gifts and benefits that AI is destined to bequeath to humanity, right? And there's a great gap between what you've described and what this mythology is about. And I'm curious about that. How you feel about crossing that threshold for the sake of all of our sakes, actually, in that sense.
Crossing the threshold, say more. How do I feel about
meaning,
will we ever close that gap? Like, will this, do you see it as being a thing that eventually will pay some sort of dividend that would make us go, oh, the ends justify the means?
It was all worth it at the end, because I'm going to live forever, that kind of thing.
Well, of course, the answer is no. We're not going to look back on this in 10 years and say, good thing we spent all of our national treasure building factories to generate AI slop for our toxic social media feeds. Good job. There was an Economist cover story a couple of weeks ago that the cover image was just a field of solar panels. And the cover story was about China's investment in renewable energy and how it is drastically outstripping American investment in renewable energy because we're taking all of our treasure and we're deploying it for, as I said, this completely lunatic bid for continued growth for 5 companies. And as I say a lot on the radio show, all of this, you understand, all of this is in service of making 8 dudes rich on the west coast of the U.S. That's what this economy is organized around. Now, I've run a company, I've advised companies, I'm in favor of companies doing business and being profitable, but we have, speaking of, crossing a gap, we have crossed the line into a different kind of economy in the last 10 years. We have entered into a kind of feudalism, techno-feudalism, and there's a book out with that same name that talks about this. The economy now is organized around an immense concentration of power and wealth that this country has never seen before, ever. Even in the Gilded Age 100 years ago, it wasn't like this. The amount of money and power that's concentrated in a few guys who own these companies, and then there's a small circle of basically vassals, of people who serve the CEOs, the broligarchs, as I like to call them, and so there's a small subset of the economy that's materially doing well because they're serving the ends of those big tech companies. And then there's the rest of us. And when I say the rest of us, I mean everyone else who's suffering from whatever kind of, I don't, recessionary. I guess we're not officially in a recession because those 5 companies are still doing well. But if you go and talk to people who are looking for jobs right now, it's not a good landscape. And then if you've talked to people whose lives and careers have been directly impacted by this AI build out, I mean, talk to musicians who used to make money selling albums or even touring. Talk to graphic designers. Talk to writers of any type. It could be novelists, could be nonfiction books, could be journalists. Talk to journalists. How are they doing right now in the age of AI? So when you look around, just talk to people and think, are we making a good investment here in propping up this feudal economy? Or might there be another model out there? And I would not want us to imitate China in very many ways, honestly. But I do like the idea, if you're going to make an investment, invest in something that is going to create some return for the future. I don't know. That's what you do. That's what you make investments for. And renewable energy, great. Let's try it. Anything but just enriching these 8 guys more.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think we're on a good trajectory.
So the name of this program is Living in the Meantime. And one of the issues is we chart the macro issues that are coming at us relentlessly 24/7. And people are feeling relentlessly disempowered, confused, and bewildered. That's kind of the impetus behind my participating in conversations like this to scale our range of vision down to how we're living our lives. And I'm curious about your take on that. One of the things I would ask you, do you use AI in any manner? And is there a way in which you have found it useful? And are there ways in which you see yourself putting boundaries around it and disciplining it? It seems to me that there's a relentless push for all of us. Actually, it's not even a push. It seems an inevitability that most everything we encounter now is going to be imbued with the, quote, promise of AI. Anyway, can you get around some of that?
Sure. I mean, I really don't use AI for very much. Now, when I do web searches, I never use Google. I haven't done a Google search in a long time. I use an alternative search engine called DuckDuckGo.
Right. I do too.
Which, if you can believe it, it gives you the results and it doesn't spy on you. And then you don't have ads following you all over the web.
By the way, do you believe it? Do you believe it?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good.
I've had the founder on Tectonic.
Oh,
and
good.
He's,
good.
As far as I can tell, he's an honest guy.
Yeah.
So, but I'm not here to encourage people to use DuckDuckGo.
Understand.
There are lots. Let me just say, there's Brave Search, there's Ecosia Search. There are a lot of other alternative search engines. Just don't use Google. Just do not use Google. But anyway, I've chosen DuckDuckGo for most of my searches. And when I go there and I search, occasionally it'll have the little AI answer before the regular results. And sometimes it answers the question. Because it's a simple question that gives a simple answer, and that was what I was looking for. Other times it might give a more involved answer, but it has the little source links, and so I click through. If I have any question at all as to the validity of the answer, I always click through to the source, so I'm not getting answers from an AI, but instead go to the source site, which also gives them some traffic, which is how these sites survive. So yeah, I don't have a ban or a boycott on AI per se, but I don't go out of my way to use it. No.
I'm very concerned about this, right? Because I really do believe that, one of the horrible things about social media that I've experienced, like just in my time growing up, is just like these parasocial relationships that we get into with people that we feel like we know, but we don't really know. And now we're really talking about getting into parasocial relationships with an entity, a thing, a man-created, mind structure, right? That really, like, to see the effect of those parasocial relationships that I was talking about before on people my age and younger, and to see how sick that has made us, right? And then I think about, what does that look like when we're no longer it's not even parasocial, it's like tech social. And then just thinking about even, going back to the .com era or whatever, like how unprepared were we for what the internet would be able to do and could do and would make possible, and regulation on things like you're talking about, like how the internet can spy on us and how people who have provided these things can. Like, we were so far behind. It's why we are where we are now. And I think about like where AI is even today versus a year ago. Like I have used ChatGPT. I have used some of these things just to kind of like get a sense of what's going on. And like, they have vastly changed in a short amount of time. And I'm just like, we are not prepared. We are not regulating. Our government is not thinking about this. And I just find myself in a state of fear over it. And yeah,
I was going to say, so Brandon, what do you do about that? In the meantime, we're paranoid, afraid, confused, bewildered. No one's doing anything about it. Okay, so what are we doing? How do we go into the?
My inclination is to unplug, right? Like, I mean, that's what comes up for me. But then I think about, like, I think Mark alluded to earlier, it's like, but what does that cost me now? If I unplugged from all of these things, especially in a job in communications or depending on where you're at, like, are you leaving the conversation? Are you,
right.
Are you ceding ground? Like, I don't know. Like, I wonder how you process that as somebody who's in this space in a certain way, as an activist, like speaking out against these things. Like, how do you process that for yourself?
That's a good question, Mark.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, first of all, how do all of us, but I'll speak for myself, how do I survive, mentally and emotionally diving into this bad news day to day and preparing it to present to an audience? Because it is pretty depressing.
Yeah.
But you remember what Fred Rogers said about a crisis or an emergency? He said, look to the helpers. Whenever there's a disaster on the news, look to see that there are people helping. And so that's what keeps me afloat, is that I keep talking to people who are out there trying to do something. They're trying to raise awareness, or they're trying to build an alternative, or they're trying to form a new community. And there's actually a lot of very hopeful activity going on. Materially, it doesn't stand up to the many trillions of dollars of wealth and all of the close partnership between the government now and these companies, the political power. It doesn't rival that, but it's far superior in the genuine relationships that people are building and the meaning that it's creating. And so I'm throwing my lot in with those folks. Here in New York City, there's a group called the Luddite Club, and I've had them on the radio show. This is a group of teenagers and now young adults who have in-person gatherings where they talk about not using smartphones anymore and not using social media, and instead reading books and cooking together and going on hikes and learning how to knit and playing a musical instrument and making art and having a fun march through the streets, and on and on and on. They're doing all these healthy things with their lives, and that movement is growing. So that's one way to look at it. There are civic groups that in some of these communities, when the data center comes to town, they band together, they stand up at the town meetings, they say no, and sometimes the civic groups actually win over big tech. And so that's kind of neat. There are little green shoots of new democracy in the country. I mean, I really think there is a future for people who want to live a meaningful life. You have to find the others, and be in community with them. And at some point, we are going to win over the concentration of power. We have to. But in the meantime, it's a process of keeping that faith that those people are out there and putting in the time and effort to go and find them. The last thing I'll say is that while your personal choices are not going to move the needle, so to speak, on these companies' dashboards, it can make a difference for you how you choose to interact with these devices and these platforms. Whenever I'm on the subway and I look up and down the subway car, about 80% of the people have their face buried in one of these things. And even walking on the sidewalk in New York City, people are walking along with their face buried in a smartphone. And I always think, there's a different, and dare I say it, there's a better way of relating to life and the people around you in this amazing city around you than burying your face in a screen that's been built by dudes on the West Coast to manipulate you into buying and reading and watching and voting the way they want you to. You can make a decision to use these platforms less. Not to say you're never going to use a smartphone ever again, but you can declare that you're going to have a different relationship to these things, not being dependent on them, not being addicted by them, but instead using them solely as a tool. You are an inert object. I will call on you when I need you, and then I will dismiss you. In the meantime, I am relating to other sentient beings, other human beings, and my cat and my dog and the trees and the birds and the grass, okay? I don't know if grass is sentient, but you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
You know,
well, some think so,
and that's fine too, and maybe the rocks
I'm
too.
teasing.
But I'm quite sure that an iPhone and the toxic sludge factory inside of it is not sentient. It is not. It is simply a money-making surveillance manipulation system that's built by those dudes on the West Coast that do not have your best interests in mind. So you can decide to have a different relationship with this giant blob that's around us all the time. You're only one person. You might not have an effect on anybody else, but it might help, clear your vision a little bit so that you can be more attuned to when there's an opportunity to find the others, to join or form a community of people who want to live more meaningfully.
Well, you just articulated in some ways in relationship to AI what I believe about life generally, which has to do, as you know, which has to do with the human engagement and what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a human fully alive? What is human flourishing? And it does not have to do with the things we hold in our hands electronically. That is not about our flourishing. But part of the mythology is that will enhance our flourishing as humans on Earth. And it escapes orbital velocity of describing that we're going to be metahuman. If we fully embrace
can I say something?
AIs. Yes.
Can I say something about this? One of the best books that I've ever read for the show, I just had recently the author on. The author's name is Adam Becker, spelled like you think. And the book is called More Everything Forever.
Yes.
And if you want one book that tells the story of the absolute insane ideology, and you might even call it a religion, that has metastasized inside that concentration of money and power in Silicon Valley. This is the book, More Everything Forever. And it talks about all of the different groups, such as the transhumanists, but there are others. But let's just talk about the transhumanists. They actually believe that we will someday, real soon now, have the technology to upload our brains into a giant cosmic cloud and then live forever. Now, how about that for religious talk? I'm going to grant you eternal life, but what you have to do is you have to fully assign your allegiance and your faith to me. And when I say me, I mean whatever oligarch is in charge of that little group.
Right.
So that's the transhumanists. Now, related to them, but slightly different, are the effective altruists and the accelerationists. And these folks think that someday, whether we've uploaded our minds or maybe we've generated much better spacefaring technology, someday humanity is going to leave the Earth and colonize the galaxy. And there's, an unbelievable number of star systems and worlds for us to colonize. And so they have various ways of estimating how many humans are going to be alive at some point, but they'll say, there's going to be, right now we have 8 billion humans. That's nothing. When we get into the galaxy, we're going to have 40 trillion. I'm just making a number.
Right. Yeah.
But that number is very important because they say anything you do today that helps advance us just a little bit towards that, let's use that number, $40 trillion endpoint. Sorry, 40 trillion human being endpoint when we've colonized the galaxy. Anything you can do is worth, if you think about in lives, if you give us, and of course it comes down to money, if you will give us $10,000, that equates to beep, 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 32 million human lives. And then someone says, well, I think I might like to give my $10,000 to Doctors Without Borders, in some of these war-torn regions to get doctors and medical supplies. And they say, no, if you do that, you're a murderer. Because you, in giving money to the poor, and they'll say this explicitly, if you give money to the poor and the needy and the vulnerable on Earth today, you're a murderer because you didn't give it to us. And we're the ones bringing humanity to the stars. And so we could have made 40 trillion humans. You're helping some piddling group of, 3 billion people who are food insecure. Shame on you. And so that is the twisted ideology. And by the way, I am not exaggerating. I mean, people are going to hear this and say, how could anyone, Hurst, you must be, you know what? Don't listen to me. Go to the Tectonic website and go listen to the interview with Adam Becker, who has talked to these guys and interviewed them. And it's true.
Well, I'll tell you this. A couple of months ago, you're both probably familiar with, Ross Douthat interviewed Peter Thiel on his podcast.
Yes. Right.
And his inability to answer like the simplest questions about our future were telling about where his mind is at and how expendable we all are. And I think I started sending that out like it was candy. I sent it to everyone I know. I'm like, watch this. And like, I just think about this and I'm like, there's so many parallels between this and the evacuation theology that I grew up with. One glad morning when this life is over, we'll fly away, we'll get away from this. Like, let's avoid bringing the kingdom to earth because, one day in the future, everything will be made right. And I can't tell you like how toxic I have seen that religion become and how many parallels there are with this thought of transhumanism and that, like, well, don't think about now. Don't think about the hurt and the damage to the environment and the way that we hate each other now. Think about this one glad morning when we'll escape this earth and escape this petty thoughts about the other. And, I mean, it disgusts me because I've seen it already play out. I mean, I think you can see it play out in even the pulpits across America, depending on what part of the country you live in. And, and so I'm so scared for where we're headed because I think a lot of us who've kind of escaped that realm realize where this is headed and how it really only benefits a few people. And
I was just going to say, there's a lot of bad religion across the spectrum going on that's related to this. And it has partly to do with capitalism. And what is that about? What does it mean? And the whole notion of growth forever has roots in our economy and our economic philosophy as well. That there's always, our growth at all costs is a greater good than any other good. And Mark has described that to great detail in terms of what the negative impacts are going to be, just practically speaking, on our environment, on our pocketbooks, and so on.
And I'll also say, I think Mark talked about this, like look to the helpers during this time, but also look to the adopters. Like who is at the dead center of pushing this stuff and talking about this stuff and being interested into this stuff? Like I see that it often is the most patriarchal, racist voices that are all in on this. And that is also scary.
Yeah, it's important. That's a good point, Brandon. It's important to ask who's benefiting from this, who's behind all of this ideology. And you're right to bring up Peter Thiel. He's one of the most influential people in Silicon Valley and thus the economy and in the government. I mean, J.D. Vance is Peter Thiel's mentee. I mean, Peter Thiel said, you're going to be a VC, you're going to be a senator, you're going to be the VP. He underwrote that transformation. Thiel is, you could do a whole series of shows on Thiel. Now, Thiel, speaking to Ross Douthat, Douthat's Catholic, and Thiel will say very openly that he's Christian, and in fact, in line with his deeply held Christian convictions, Thiel recently gave a 4-part lecture series to the Commonwealth Club in California. And you think, what is Thiel, a venture capitalist and founder and funder of all these tech companies, going to talk to the Commonwealth Club, this very prestigious lecture series in California about? He was giving a 4-lecture series on the Antichrist. And you go, hold up. What are we doing? Yeah. And of course, it sold out instantly because in Silicon Valley, as I said, he's a kingpin. So he draws attention and people who want to be in his orbit. Immediately sold out. And yeah, when he had the New York Times interview, Doth had asked him, is there a future for humanity? And Thiel was, unable to, he makes these strange voices in his throat. I mean, I don't want to make fun of someone, but Thiel I'll just say he's a little strange. The other thing that is strange about Thiel, although he's not unique in this, is that he has this strange tendency of naming things after characters or objects in The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Lord. So Thiel has this company called Palantir, which is basically a surveillance company that's partnering with law enforcement all across the country and collecting all the surveillance data on all of us. This is warrantless.
Truly evil.
Warrantless spying on Americans. They do foreign work as well. But just in the U.S., Fourth Amendment of search and seizure, you're not supposed to be searching me without a warrant. That's what it says in the Constitution. Palantir is running unchecked. The government's not going to stop Palantir because they kind of like getting the surveillance data. Mm-hmm. So that's going to take that's a lifetime's work of somebody out there to bring back enforcement of or acknowledgement of the Fourth Amendment. Anyway, so Palantir is this company about surveillance. What was Palantir in The Lord of the Rings? For someone who hasn't read that book, that trilogy by Tolkien, Palantir was basically this crystal ball that allowed someone to spy on other parts of Middle Earth. And if they used it in the wrong way, it would drive them crazy. So while the Palantir itself wasn't evil, it was involved in a lot of evil. I mean, it's basically exactly the same as how surveillance is playing out. Because a lot of these guys, I truly think a lot of them have gone a little loopy. And let's just stick with Lord of the Rings. That's one of my favorite books, by the way. And I think Lord of the Rings, if there's one overriding thread or message that I took from, and I've read it multiple times, Lord of the Rings is about power and the effect of power on people. And in its embodiment in the story, in the One Ring of Sauron, Tolkien makes very clear, everybody wants it. Everybody thinks that they're going to wield it, maybe for good at first. And everybody who grasps that ultimate power goes crazy. And they become enslaved by their addiction to that power. And if you look now, again, at what's happening on the West Coast in Silicon Valley and throughout, I mean, they have representatives here in New York as well. I don't mean to disparage an entire geographic region, but I'm just using Silicon Valley as a metaphor. If you look at that concentration of power in that small group of people, the incidence of just frankly crazy thinking, speaking, and ideology that comes out of it, when they say, we're going to upload our minds and we're going to have a bright, shining future of living forever with 40 trillion other humans, like you say, Brandon, you've been through this before. You can look at that and you can say, that's wrong, that's crazy, and that's dangerous. Well, I think, to in a way, to be a little bit compassionate to these people who are saying these things, I think that they simply have come under the sway of too much power. And it's much like what happened in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, no, that's all. I read Lord of the Rings when I was in high school, and it was a powerful, powerful read for me as I emerged into my adulthood. And you're right, Mark. It is all about the power and the corruptions that power brings. Gosh, I want to come back to, in the meantime, the focus that has been discussed here, which is, in the meantime, we're focusing on individual humans and the collective humanity of all of us. That to me is where the energy is. And to your earlier admonition, to learn to discipline yourself around what the electronic universe has presented to us. And don't be misled into thinking the power you hold in your hand is the ultimate power that there is, or will be your pathway to the ultimate power. Because in the sense, then, from a religious point of view, it's a form of idolatry. And we want to stay focused on the compassionate regard with which we hold one another and with which we embrace the rest of humanity. I think that's kind of the antidote in my book, is to help people remain relentlessly focused on what does it mean to be fully in relationship with other human beings.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you bring up idolatry. I've done some reading on this, and it turns out that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all three Abrahamic faiths, have a long history of warning against idolatry.
Exactly.
So this is old wisdom.
It's core.
It is.
Yeah.
So, and it's as you're saying, Steve, it's just a basic orientation to what is true, what is meaningful, rather than what's false and what's an illusion. And these devices, this is the thing, these devices, these platforms can be helpful. Here we are using the internet right now to record this podcast, and it's convenient, and we're going to share it, and that's fine. I'm not a fan of Substack, I'll admit, but other than that, I think this is a.
I knew you'd get that in.
Yeah, you knew it. Not a fan of Substack, but because it's funded by one of those 8 dudes on the West Coast. But anyway,
understood.
There are positive uses for digital technology. Where it starts to go awry is when the people who are in control of these platforms build them to be illusions of something real and meaningful in a real relationship. And you can't blame the victim, the people who have fallen into these spirals of depression or delusion or whatever because of these chatbots. It's not their fault. There were teams of highly paid psychologists who developed and designed and tweaked those platforms in order to have that outcome. But whoever is, beyond the blame, it is very much like idolatry, Steve, the same kind of idolatry that those 3 Abrahamic faiths warned against, because you have people who are, if not worshiping, they're trying to have some meaningful relationship with what is essentially just a pile of glass and sand and metal.
Well, and to Brandon's point earlier, the earlier versions of engagement with people online and the social relationship is basically built on a false presentation, because everyone online is a performance artist. They're presenting something that isn't fundamentally true or accurate about themselves. And it strikes me that AI has simply exponentially increased the disruptive quality of that engagement. It just has amplified it wildly. And I think I see a corollary in regular human beings trying to make their way through lives. I see a lot of people living performative lives, and it's a kind of narcissism in a sense. And to your point, it's not as though people are to blame, but they are reflecting what they've been experiencing and been nurtured on in the electronic universe, so that they live performative lives. And they're not as capable of relating deeply, authentically, and purposefully with other human beings. All the more reason to encourage people, our listeners today, to take to heart the idea of what does it mean to be in relationship with the people who populate our lives as opposed to populate the electronic sphere, right?
Yeah.
I'm noting, Mark, that we're kind of coming up on an hour, and I want to be attentive to that for your sake as well as for our listeners' sake. But either one, Mark, Brandon, what are some other thoughts here for now? Because I imagine Mark will be speaking with us again in the future at some point. Any thoughts?
Well, if people want to read more or explore my work, my newsletter's at creativegood.com. And my radio show, which is also a podcast, is at tectonic.fm. That's TECH tonic.fm. And as a parting thought, I just say it's important for people to gain awareness, but don't get depressed, because there is good news.
Yes, of course.
Things are good. Things are going to turn out well at some point.
Oh, yeah.
But the first step towards that good outcome is to gain awareness, so that you're not taken advantage of by those oligarchs.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Great. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Okay. More to come.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us again on Living in the Meantime with Stephen Bauman. You can go to stephenbauman.com to subscribe to the Substack or any of our podcast links. In the coming weeks, be looking for more interviews and longer form podcasts that will be posted to the channel. We'll see you next week.